Hello to all of you. Greetings from Harare, Zimbabwe, where I sit. And it looks to me like at least a few people here might be familiar with that part of the world. Tafadzwa, I'm wondering about you with a name like Tafadzwa. But a very great pleasure to see you all. And my greetings also to my colleague Scott Drimmie from the University of Stellenbosch and various other places in South Africa, including the Food Lab, who joins me here today. It's always a pleasure to have him next to me as we present on this. What I'd like to talk to you about today is effectively the process, the system which we refer to as the integrated phase classification, the IPC, and this has become the more or less the world's global standard for classifying food crises and for doing detailed multi-sectoral food security analysis at national and subnational level. And I'm going to take you through that a little bit. Some of this does get technically quite convoluted, and if you have questions, please, as always, put them in the chat. As the questions come up, I'm sure Scott will try to. If Scott can answer them right away, then he will do so, and if not, then I'm sure we'll have a chance to talk them over in greater detail at the end of the session. So I have about 18 or 19 slides I wanted to share with you. So without further ado, I think I'm going to go ahead. So for those of you wondering who I am and what indeed gives me the right to speak to you like this, as Alberto says, my name is Jannie, and I work as the learning systems developer for IPC. And as part of that work, which involves designing and developing and presenting all of the training material we do, I maintain the portfolio of academic liaisons. So it made sense for me to be in touch with Perry on this initiative. And we're certainly very glad to be here. Okay, so what we're going to do here is talk a little bit about what we know about the IPC. I'm going to present to you a little bit how it works. And certainly if you're already familiar, then feel free to share your experience with it. We're very happy to hear from you on that. And then we'll talk a little bit about what we've learned as we go forward. The first thing to mention is that although myself and Scott are situated within FAO administratively, the integrated phase classification is the result of a consortium of 15 organizations. You can see them across the bottom of the screen on the slide. But just to make it clear that this isn't necessarily an FAO initiative per se, it is rather a collective effort of these 15 agencies. In Southern Africa, SADC is a key member of the steering committee and is a global partner. So just to make that clear to all. And okay, so I thought I'd start with this. So when you're thinking about food security and nutrition, and you're trying to determine how serious the situation is, I wonder if you could just look at this list of 16 here. And give me a suggestion in the chat box, which one of these 16 you think would be the most important thing to include. If I've missed something on this slide, then please make your own suggestions here. But I've made some suggestions as to what you'd want to know when you are determining this food security situation, which is the accuracy. You'd want to have a method which was agreed to. You'd want to be able to compare location A with location B. Is it better or worse than somewhere else? You'd want to have it owned and operated by the country. You'd need some technical rigor. You'd want it timely. You'd want it at the time that you needed to determine your response or decide how serious the situation was. You'd want it to cover the areas that you were interested in. You'd want to be able to understand it. And you'd want it on the smallest possible level, and you'd want some attention to the gender dimensions of the food security context. You'd want it to be current. It's no good telling me what the thing was 5 years ago. You need to let me know now. But equally, you want to know what's coming so that you can decide how to plan your future response. You'd want to know the population. You'd want to make the distinction between acute and chronic. That is this a sudden onset, rapidly declining situation as a result of a crisis like an earthquake or a conflict? Or is it a chronic situation? Is this the result of sequential years of rainfall failure, for instance? You'd want to be able to inform and improve this food security and nutrition status. And would you also see this as an opportunity to build the analytical capacity of the team? And finally, what's all this going to cost? How long would you take? Cost efficiency in this case means not only money, but also time. Like how much time would it be worth to take? So if it was you and you were designing this, just pop in the chat box which one of these you think would be most important. I'm going to give you a couple minutes to do that. And like I say, if I've neglected one, then just please tell me. Okay, so Willem is first off the blocks. Very good. Willem is looking at 14 and 15. So that is in there to inform food security and nutrition and build the capacity of analysis of analysts. Thank you. Sumaya is looking at number 11 and seeing the forecast is the most important. It's no good to tell us what has happened. We want to know what's going to happen so we can prepare. Also very useful. Marianne Moriuki is filling number 10 and number 12. So she would like to know more about the current situation, what's happening right now. And then also the population, how many people are we talking about? Patricia is seeing chronic versus acute. Number 13 there, that's more important. What are the differences between the acute situation and the chronic situation? Any other final ones to Dorica is seeing 6 and 16. So timely classifications and updates, so we have to be prompt in this and then also be cost efficient. Tafadzwa is seeing, well, we're coming thick and fast. Tafadzwa wants 4, 6, and 12. So that's 2 votes for number 6 now. And 2 votes for number 12. And Vincent comes with number 1, is accurate and neutral. Also, again, another one for the population. And the other one is 13, distinguishing the acute and the chronic. Great, thank you. Ladies and gents, as you probably guessed, this was something of a trick question. At its most full, the IPC would intend to do all of these. The IPC emerged from historically emerged in the early 90s from the fact that, the early 2000s, I should say, from the fact that different food security and nutrition indicators did some of these, but no indicator did all of them all of the time. And the food security, the IPC analysis platform, therefore, is a way of bringing together different data from different domains and harmonizing it into one consolidated whole, which on a good day would cover all 16 of these. So what that means is that the IPC has four components. It's a process for building evidence-based technical consensus. What we mean there is that the IPC, the integrated phase classification, starts by identifying who the key people around food security and nutrition in a given context are, and then bringing them together to let them start coming up with their best sense of what is happening, and that is supported by evidence. The IPC then ideally would provide a series of data points which would be used by decision makers to know what to do next. So the idea is to provide not an abstract or theoretical vision of what is happening, but rather a complete vision which would then be used for both policy at national level and program making at a subnational level. It aspires to be rigorous and neutral. Every step of the IPC, as I'll show you in a minute, is totally transparent and can be audited by anyone at any time. So if there's anything that happens in terms of a decision process, all of the working is laid bare. Everything is based on information in the public domain, and this therefore should be something which should be, it should be understandable how a decision is reached. And then finally, it's a partnership. As we know, food security is a multi-sectoral, multi-stakeholder domain, which involves a number of different interests at a number of different geospatial and policy levels. And that partnership, as I showed you on the current slide, is mentioned again here, involves a number of different partners in order to work. The IPC belongs to no one stakeholder and cannot work as a standalone basis. It is the product of partnership. So the intent here then is to try to take complex food security data, which is indicated on the left-hand side of this slide from those various things that are happening, from mapping data to narrative to quantitative data around food consumption, as well as the tree on the top left is to indicate sort of focus group discussions at a community or as a village level, and consolidate it into something which is consistent and clear, and which can then be actionable. And I think that the fundamental metric, therefore, for the IPC is this 5-phase classification from phase 1, which is effectively food secure, up to phase 5, which is famine or catastrophe, and is as a consequence very rare. Most countries would tend to be somewhere in the middle. The example there, if you can see it, is with CAR, Central African Republic, where again, even for a country, in that context, we see largely orange phase 3, to some extent phase 4 in certain border areas, okay? And so the IPC aspires to answer 6 questions, going back to those 16 that we started with, which is how many people are food insecure, which would be the population numbers, how severe, which is the phase classification from 1 to 5, who are they, what is the particular demographic breakdown of this population, is this a displaced population, are they pastoralists, are they urban, are they rural, where are they? Which parts of the country are they? When is the food insecurity, when vis-a-vis seasonality, vis-a-vis man-made or natural events, is that food insecurity happening? And most critically is why. Why indeed what are the causes of this particular food security crisis? The hope is that these findings would be comparable across both time and space. So in the top graphic there, you see time sequence data for Somalia. The IPC was founded initially in Somalia, so we have time sequence data for the Horn of Africa, which goes back now about 15 years. So that can show you a little bit how things have evolved over time. And equally, because the scale is standard, it's comparable across time and space. So you can look at, in theory, therefore, if you had need of doing so, you could look at the situation in Sudan and the situation in DRC, or South Sudan and DRC, and have some basis for comparability to see where the needs are greater. And then finally, this information is then used to inform responses. The critical global report, which IPC is used for, is the Global Report on Food Crisis, which usually comes out in the first quarter of every year. But it also goes to inform the humanitarian response plan, the needs overview, the flash appeal, and within the Southern Africa region, the SADC regional humanitarian appeal. Okay, it's made up of 3 scales. And there are three descriptions here, 3 different analytical approaches depending on the nature of the food insecurity in question. On the left, you have an illustration of acute food insecurity, which is serious and short-term and dramatic generally. And that is, for that, we use the acute food insecurity scale. On the extreme right, you have chronic food insecurity. This is more persistent or stubborn or embedded, consistent shortfalls in people's ability to access food. And that is chronic. And then finally, we have acute malnutrition as well, which is, again, generally as a function of acute food insecurity, but not always when you have sudden spikes in the level of acute malnutrition. So we have these 3 scales. And the hope is that in countries where one is able to do all 3 of these analyses, you then get a very complex overlay, which should give you a very complete picture of the situation in a given region, country, or sub-region. So with this in mind, if you can still see me on my camera, all of this is laid out in this weighty volume, which is the IPC Technical Manual. And when I'm done presenting here, I'll send you a couple of links so you can download this if you wish. All of what I'm giving you is available on the website. I'll take you through a few of the key points there. And it basically consists of 4 functions, which is the IPC consists of building technical consensus, which is to say you get together all the people who have something to contribute on discussions of food security in a given context, and you seek out their inputs. You gather them together, you get them to agree, and that then becomes the shared, jointly owned, jointly understood analysis of a given situation. That technical consensus is used to classify severity and identify key drivers, which is another way of answering the question of how severe and why. And that then lays the groundwork for knowing what the response should be. And that again is something that we spend a great deal of time in the process. All of this has to then be communicated. If you need to be able to understand what is being proposed and what is being explained, so that is then communicated. And finally, with every analysis, we undertake a very extensive quality assurance, which is effectively a real-time learning exercise. If you want, it's something like an audit where we go back and discuss everything that we've done in a particular country, identify what the issues were, and we're constantly in a process of learning to make sure that we're doing things as best we can all the time. So how long does all of this take? Well, I think the key thing to know here is that the first one takes long, and after that they go much faster. Scott may be able to correct me, but I think we generally think these days that if from starting from zero to having a full analysis, if all goes very well, the first one takes about 3 months. Subsequent ones can take as little as 2 weeks. And in major crises, such as, for example, Yemen, they can even go even faster, depending on a number of other challenges. And as you can imagine, working in conflict areas brings up its own challenges. So, but the first step in all this is we plan. We spend a great deal of time at our small unit in Rome, gathering all the information that's available, organizing it, putting it together, identifying who we think should be part of this process, and then hosting a training with them to make sure that everyone understands the analytical tool. And that preparation, it makes, certainly pre-COVID, the preparing step meant a lot of logistics, organizing workshop space, organizing hotels, flights, organizing adequate IT support so that everyone could then participate in the process meaningfully. Post-COVID, we've done a lot more stuff online, so there's been a fair amount of virtual preparation we've had to engage in. Then the analysis itself begins, that's step 3. And that, as I say, can take anywhere between, the really fast ones take 3 to 5 days, and longer ones can take up to 2 weeks. But at the end of that, then you come up with an analysis which is then communicated to policymakers and the public. And that then at that point, assuming it is endorsed, it then is complete, and you then begin the learning process to reflect on what you've done, see what you could do better next time, and so on. Okay, so this map then, and again, there's a couple of interactive tools I'll show you in a moment that indicate more or less where we are. This is just a very broad snapshot, but essentially we're concentrated. I think we're currently in about 36 countries. Largely in sub-Saharan Africa, but also in South Asia, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and also in Latin America. So Haiti, Guatemala, Salvador, Honduras as well. And these tools, as I will show you, are all open and will be able to be explored by you if you like. Again, there's a lot of steps here, a lot of process, and these are effectively built into 6 protocols. And the process through which the analysis happens is tracked so that we know exactly where we are in the process against these six protocols. So the first of which is we look at the analytical framework, and I'll show you that in a minute. And the evidence then is compared against the analytical framework and the reference table, which is the global blueprint against which the data is handled. Then the parameters for each bit of evidence are then considered and the data applied therein. Thereafter, the quality of the evidence is reviewed, and this is something I could have spent a lot more time talking about today, but I'm going to talk about it very briefly. But we have to evaluate the evidence reliability, and the evidence that reaches IPC comes from a variety of sources of varying degrees of rigor and robustness, and we need to identify the quality and the reliability of that evidence. That's then compared against the minimum evidence requirements. For the IPC, there are minimum thresholds that have to be met in order to conduct an analysis. And all of this has to be documented. All of this is done, if you're interested in using an online database called the Information Support System, the ISS. So this is done, there's a great deal of technical support that goes into this. And I know you likely don't believe me, but it is easier than it looks. So for those of you more interested in the conceptual side of food security, this is the food security analytical framework. This is the basis through which we arrange our thinking. So the contributing factors for food security are in the top left. The pillars of food security, that is, those of you who are familiar with access, availability, utilization, and stability, are in the bottom left. And this then leads to the outcomes. And the outcomes first reflect changes to food consumption and livelihoods, that is to say, less severe And then the second level outcomes are where things get more severe, which is changes to nutritional status and mortality. That's the point at which you begin to see a decline in dietary quality translating into malnutrition, for instance. And this is effectively the cycle that IPC considers as basically the analytical framework it considers. And what we do with the reference table is we insert data into this framework in order for it to make sense. I would also just specify that if you notice in the top right, there is a gray box, and we do acknowledge, as of course we should, that changes to livelihood, changes to nutritional status and mortality are not only a function of food or nutrition-related issues. There's a great deal of non-food issues which pertain as well, and those are indeed also considered here, even if the focus of the IPC is on food side stuff. So, again, effectively, I'm going to zoom through these, but basically what these do is this table then is the reference table, and this is kind of the Rosetta Stone for everything we do. This is where we translate the data we have into a consistent system. And so the first thing is that the outcomes from the bottom right of the analytical framework correspond to those lines and rows over there on food security outcomes and contributing factors on the left. Then the phases are across the top. This is then the basis where for each one of these phases, and I realize this font is far too small to look, but when you get the link to the technical manual on page 35, this is there. Each one of these phases has its own cutoffs and its own descriptions, its own thresholds, which are then applied. And each one of the phases also then has a broad description of what action is required. That is to say, this is not a programming document, but it would suggest what the focus of policy and programming action should be. Phase 3 is crisis and higher, which means that from that point, one should begin thinking about ways to save lives. Phase 2 and phase 1 would be more about protecting livelihoods and building resilience. So, excuse me. Okay. Okay, so for each one of these elements, therefore, for each phase, there are severity, indicators for cutoffs, and further additional evidence, which can be included with short descriptions for each one. And these are basically used to compare the data, the in situ data against the blueprint. And again, for each of the indicators, if you remember in the analytical framework, we have these indicators. There are thresholds which are then established for each one at different phase levels. So you would be able then to take data and determine whether the data on food consumption or household dietary diversity fits into more phase 1 or phase 2 or so. Okay. Okay, and the critical thing here, if you like, the innovation of IPC is it's this convergence of evidence. Food security was for decades hamstrung by the fact that people kept trying to find one indicator which would explain everything. And the consensus at this point is that that's more or less not possible. You need a wide range of indicators because food security is such a multi-sectoral issue. You need multi-sectoral indicators. And IPC brings these together by a convergence of evidence. So that means bringing together as much evidence as possible and having consensus emerge based on the technical standards that we provide from the group in the country or in the sub-region. Whatever convergence of evidence is reached, there needs to be an explanation for it. It needs to be understood. And this is especially critical because for all as we try to explain everything, there's always going to be situationally specific factors which we don't always take well into account. A very quick example of this was I recently was made aware of an analysis that took place in Kasai in DRC, where all the indicators were actually trending positive, but there had recently been a spill of toxic materials from a nearby mine into the river. And as a consequence, all of the fish had been affected and the water quality for those populations along the river was affected. And so therefore, the convergence of evidence in this case, despite the fact that some of the indicators are trending positive, that analysis team actually concluded a more negative phase. And they felt that was because of this toxic environmental spill, which again is a perfect example of them being able to make take into consideration the situationally specific factors and write it up and make it clear why that's the case. Okay. I'm going to move through this. These effectively are the quantitative indicator thresholds for each one of the key indicators that we use. I'm happy to come back to this if you wish, but I'm sensitive to time, so I'm going to go forward. And then finally, this is the other thing that this is more or less my last slide. The other thing that we do here is that we classify from most severe to least. And we work through this by identifying which is the highest phase, which has 20% of the population or higher in it. In other words, the threshold for classification starts at 20%. So I've just really, and this then would help us to generate then the population estimates for which area. And this is extensively cross-checked through the convergence of evidence process. But I wondered, again, if we can just use the chat function here. I've given you two examples. If you look at the top example there with phase 4 and 15, phase 3 and 35, phase 2, 30, and phase 1, 20, I wonder if you could just put in the chat box what therefore the correct phase classification for that area would be. I'll give you a minute or two to do that. Anyone have any idea if I lost you? Okay. So in this instance, therefore, we would in fact classify as phase 3. And the reason for that is the 35% there in phase 3. The reason being that that is the point at which the food security is most accentuated for the most number of people. And we would prefer to err on the side of inclusion rather than exclusion. So in this case, the first phase, reading from right to left, which exceeds the 20% threshold, is phase 3. So therefore, we would classify this area as phase 3. With this in mind, could you look at the second example and consider which phase would be most applicable here? Okay, thank you, Patricia. Patricia's saying phase 1. Alberto's thinking maybe phase 3. Anyone else? Okay, I'm going to actually say that indeed it is phase 2. Alberto, it is not phase 3 because phase 3 is only in 10%. Therefore, that doesn't breach the 20% threshold. Patricia, it's not phase 1. Because we classify from most severe to least. So we work backwards, as it were, from phase 5 down to phase 1. So it would, in fact, the first threshold working backwards that breaks the 20% mark is phase 2. So therefore, we would make it phase 2. The reason being that that would then include the 40% in phase 2 and phase 3 and the 10 and the 5% phase 3 and 4. If we've classified phase 1, we would effectively be omitting 55% of the population, which wouldn't quite work. So, so there you go. I'm going to stop sharing that, and I'm promptly going to start sharing again because I think I just wanted to show you a few of the resources that we have, and just let you know a little bit about where we're at. So I just wanted to show you that this is our main page. This is the IPC info homepage, and I'll put all these links in the chat as well. But the technical manual, this book I waved at you, is available here. It's available in 3 languages, possibly 4: English, French, Spanish at a minimum, Arabic on the way, Portuguese on the way, I believe. And this is also supported by guidance notes, which if you have particular interest in a very specific topic, this is where we come up with the particular, very precise guidance on issues like humanitarian food assistance, projections, COVID, and so on, if you're interested in that. The country portal is here. This shows us the various analyses we've done around the world. It's searchable by country, by period, and by type of analysis across those three. So if you're interested in a particular country, feel free to come look here. Again, all of these are available, and for the sake of interest, if you click on any of these links, you will then be given access to either a full report or a short report in countries that are bilingual or have different user bases, like DRC. It would be available in different languages. And in this case, all of this is downloadable and has plenty of detail if you wish to dig deeper as you feel free. I showed you a map a little while ago. This is the IPC mapping tool. This again is available for you to use at will. You can zoom in on a particular country, particular region, and it will give you the analysis down to the level of disaggregation that we were able to support. One other thing I should mention for any West Africans in the group today, in West Africa, this is implemented slightly differently and has a slightly different acronym. It's called Cadre Harmonisé. Cadre Harmonisé is completely unified with IPC, but it is a separate separate scale operated by CLIS, the regional grouping there. But we work hand in hand with Cadre Harmonisé all the time. The population tracking tool here allows you to track populations in need over time across the time sequence data that we have. And the other thing, just a couple of other links, like I say, I'll send you all of these. We're also integrated with the WFP hunger map. If you're working with WFP at all, then the home screen for the hunger map is the current food consumption. But if you click on the icon on the right, it will then give you the IPC classification for each country as well. And there are links and again, links to the databases for each of those. Finally, if I've spoken way too fast or I've put too much in this talk for you to absorb, we have a whole learning portfolio online. If IPC is something you'd like to learn more about, there's a great many courses at this address, learning, which will give you introduction or will allow you to go deep into any of the phase classifications that we offer. And I encourage you to explore all of those. This website allows for both self-directed study. There's a great deal of resource material in the reference library, and this is also the place where, if you want to, you can sign up to be part of an analysis and get a bit of firsthand experience and work towards certification in IPC if that's something of interest to you. I think I'll stop there. I realize this is quite a lot, but Scott, was there anything that you wanted to add, or will we open the floor at this point?
Yeah, all good from my side. Thank you.
Okay, great. Well, Alberto, I think I'll hand it back to you then for a moment, and I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone may have.
Sure, Jannie, thank you so much. That was a very, very intriguing presentation, and as you say, it was a lot of information, but incredibly insightful and really enlightening. I'm particularly very impressed with the online presence of the IPC, all the various online platforms to both, to analyze and to sort of see the extent of the situation, but also as you say, the learning platforms are particularly really interesting. Actually, that's sort of one of the questions I have is, how long has this data? You maybe touched on it a bit in your presentation, maybe I missed it, but like how long? Because I have to admit, it's very impressive how much information that is available online, and sort of the extent of this research, as you say, from you can analyze this from both a regional level, but you can go down to even localized levels to a certain degree, and just even with the learning platforms. How long have these online platforms actually been available for? That's just out of personal interest there.
So the online platforms, thanks for the question, Alberto. The online platforms really jump-started. They've been works in progress for some years, but they really got jump-started by COVID, as I think happened with all of us. All of a sudden, everything we had to do had to all of a sudden move online, and that meant that we had to have a great deal more available online. And so I think that certainly the learning platforms, we did our initial testing actually in this region. We did our first online training platforms in Southern Africa with the strong support of SADC, and that was in, I think, April of 2020, just after after the pandemic locked us all down. And since then, we've been building and building. And I think right now we have a very good portfolio. The e-learning has been around for quite some time, and we've revised it at least once. And I will say that I do find the e-learning material incredibly well designed. I didn't have much to do with it, but it's very good. And I would just also say that one of the things that we specified was that all of that e-learning stuff is downloadable. You can run it offline. So you can do a single download of, I think it's about 40 megabytes or 50 megabytes, it's not very big. So for populations who don't have strong internet access, these materials are also available for anybody who would wish to have them. One final point on this, Alberto, is that all the data that we use is public domain, all of it. We don't use anything which isn't already published, and usually that means published by government. So in terms of what data is there, we don't use anything that anybody else couldn't already find, as it were. And that's mostly for transparency purposes, but also so as not to draw conclusions which can't then be justified by the data. So I hope that answers your question.
No, it really does, and then some. No, that was really fantastic, and I think really interesting. I know certainly I think with because we're part of a consortium of African universities that focus on disaster risk reduction, I think certainly, especially these self-online training courses could also be very interesting to our students. So I'll be certain to advertise that widely amongst our partners to make them a bit more aware. I'm sure many of them are, but certainly this was very enlightening and very insightful for me, and I'll be very interested in sharing amongst our partners. But I feel a bit guilty for stealing you away first and asking questions. So I want to open up to the participants. If there are any questions from the colleagues on the call, or any colleagues in the session, please, if you have any questions for Jannie, go ahead and ask. Oh, I see there's a question from Patricia. She's written hers down. I'm not sure if you can see that in the chat there, Jannie. She asks, I'm interested in urban food security. I wonder if there's a difference in the way data is collected and analyzed in urban environments compared to perhaps more typically studied rural areas.
Patricia, thank you. That's a dynamite question. Excellent. And I absolutely, the answer to your initial question is emphatically yes. In the sense that food security in urban areas is a very, has a different set of stakeholders. It has a different set of characteristics, and it is also, I'm going slightly off topic, but historically has been slightly less well understood, certainly in the global south, than rural food insecurity. There's a tendency to assume that populations produce and consume their own food and tend to be smallholder agriculture producers first and then consumers second. Urban populations turn that on its head. And just to further complicate this, obviously COVID came along and made this even triply complex. I am very happy to say that some of the very early work that has some of the initial forays into applying IPC in urban areas happened right in your very own backyard in Gauteng. And there was work done, I think, in December 2020. It was the first time IPC has been done in South Africa. And they did look, based on support from government, we did indeed do an IPC analysis of Gauteng generally. I can't remember the subdivision within Gauteng as to what level of disaggregation we had, but yes. So Patricia, I think that from where I sit, one of the critical issues that we face with urban food security is that urban food security tends to be more the purview of a different level of governance. This tends to be more civic government, the mayor's office, provincial governance. We sometimes don't have the same, when you look at those 15 organizations at the bottom of our chart there, we don't necessarily have the same point of entry with them that we would at national level. And that is country to country specific. And we do need to work on that straight up. But Scott, I am really going to pass this one to you because I think that when it comes to urban food insecurity, you know a great deal more than I do. If you're still on the call, are you still on the call?
No, I'm not sure if he is.
Scott,
no, I think unfortunately he must have left at some point. Sorry about that.
That's a great shame because inter alia, Scott knows a very great deal about urban food insecurity, especially in South Africa, and is a great person to talk to and think about. So, Patricia, then I'll just wrap up my comments by saying I think that from a pure technical or analytical point of view, there's no reason why the IPC framework wouldn't work. But it would take a slightly different composition of players on the field in order to get the most traction out of it. I hope that's a little bit woolly, but I think that's how I would respond to that.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jannie, and thank you so much, Trish, for the question. Are there any other questions from the colleagues? Feel free to raise your hand if you want to speak or to write a question down. Yeah, I don't think there are any more questions. I'm sorry, I'm fresh out of questions. I'm still very new to this field, but it's so incredibly insightful, I think, to learn about this, because I have to admit, food security has never been sort of my strong suit. But I've always been more and more. I've been so interested in getting more into it because I have been very much involved in sort of urban risk issues and sort of looking at community resilience. And unfortunately, food security was just never something that I've looked into so specifically, but after today's session, I'm really quite intrigued by it to explore it more, and certainly I'm definitely going to take a gander at those short course trainings that you advertise and such. So I think if there's no more questions from the group, I think quite happy to call it a day. Unless you have any other last comments or suggestions or any other last thoughts or inputs that you'd like to provide.
Folks, if there isn't anything right now, please, I've put my email in the chat. Please be in touch anytime. I'd be more than happy to follow up with you. You live in a region, I'm assuming most of you are in Southern Africa, but you live in a region with a very vibrant engagement with the IPC. The regional VACs, the RVACs are very much involved with IPC, and we'd be more than happy to be in touch with any one of you. If there's anything we can do, either in South Africa or anywhere in the region, if that is of help, if that is of use. So yeah, please be in touch anytime. My email's there, and I'm sure Alberto can provide you with further details to be in touch if you need it. Thank you.
No, thank you so much. So thank you so much, Jannie, and I really appreciate you putting your personal email address out there. That's quite a brave thing to do. You might get spammed a bit. But no, but really appreciate you coming forward to talk to us today, for taking your time out, especially for coming in for your colleague to present today. Really appreciate that. And I think I think myself and a lot of the colleagues have found this really insightful. And I think thank you again so much for the links and the information. I think they'll be very well utilized amongst us. And I just want to say thank you to all the participants also for joining for today's session. And we look forward to seeing you again. We have another PPU Talks next week, so please look out for that, as we've got a partner from Cameroon speaking to us. And so I can't remember the topic off the top of my head right now, but please do join us for that. And again, Jannie, thank you so much for joining us today. We really enjoyed your discussion, and we look forward to future communication and engagement with you. Thank you again.
It's a great pleasure, everyone. Have a good rest of your day and a good rest of your week. Thanks so much, and thanks to you, Alberto. I appreciate the opportunity.